1 week season.
1 week season fam, welcome back. It is Mike Johnson, M Johnson 86 coming to you for week 10 NFL DFS FanDuel Labs. We are going to get into all the strategy around this week's slate. We have a 10-game slate. Once again, a lot of interesting things to dive into. We've got some different pricing situations that we've got to talk about. We'll probably go down the Arthur Smith rabbit hole at some point, whether we like it or not. And yeah, we're going to get right into it. I'm going to pull in my guest, our main man, Maximus. Welcome back. How are we doing today?
Hello. Happy to be back. Look forward to going over some early thoughts for week 10. Yeah, week 10 here. Flying by.
Yeah, absolutely. How'd week 9 treat you?
Wasn't the best week for me, and it was kind of odd because I had the right game environments, but I didn't have the nut players from those environments, so to speak. But I did keep my streak alive. We're at 9 straight weeks now of at least one of 5 teams placing in the tournament that we usually cover each week. That was actually a Dak team, but I had a CJ Stroud team, but I had Nico and Tank with the Evans run backs. You needed to have Dell and Schultz and Rashad. So it's one of those things. But it's, getting the game environment right is the first step. But even after you get the game environment right, there's still, obstacles you have to get through, which makes DFS obviously somewhat difficult, even when you're in the right area.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that because one of my not stands, but one of the plays that I made last week was obviously the Dallas Philly game was one of the more popular ones. But I looked at it and I'm like, okay, the Eagles they're a really good run defense. Pollard on FanDuel, he's going to be popular. On DraftKings, he's a little expensive. So that's a tough play. Dak in the passing game makes sense, but Ferguson made sense at tight end. Lamb is a good play, but I was also what if some touchdowns or some, stuff goes through the secondary receivers? So I played Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup. Well, then, of course, Cavante Turpin and Jalen Tolbert score touchdowns or whatever. So, like you said, you can be right about something secondary Dallas receivers, having some production was basically the bet. But, I think Tolbert and Turpin, they each played 20 snaps, I believe. And they're the ones who scored the touchdowns though. So I was right, but you don't get anything for it. So, it's just an interesting, like you said, there's such a thin needle to thread on some of this stuff that you just have to be able to kind of shrug it off and know you made, the best decision you could at the time and kind of move on from there. Turpin played 13 snaps on offense and Tolbert played 31. It's
I was the victim right with you. The team that actually placed in the tourney, I had Cooks. He was kind of my one close to bagel player out of the whole lineup. I mean, I had the Browns defense. That team I actually flipped. I didn't have Ferguson. I had Goddard and CD as my skinny stack. So CD did well, but Goddard not so much.
Mm-hmm.
And my running backs, I had Jerome Ford or something. He didn't really have that great a game. But I had the Stroud, Nico Dell, Evans run back too as well. But yeah, no, it's I was on Cooks too on some teams, and when you know it goes down to the third layer, the third tier of receivers that are getting the volume.
Well, and I mean that's just that's stuff you can't really control, and there's you even look at the Colts game, Jonathan Taylor, he did finally get the massive percentage of the workload. Zach Moss didn't play that much. The Panthers are a poor run defense, but just the way things went, the Panthers offense was so bad. The Colts defense had 2 touchdowns. And And so the Panthers basically sold out to stop the run, and the Colts were just fine, basically maybe, going 3 and out or getting a first down and then punting, after the next one. They weren't really aggressive. They weren't trying to like make them pay for loading the box. They just got out of there with the win. So again, it's like, you can do all the research you want, and your process can be very good in a lot of ways, but the ball, it's an oblong shaped ball that bounces funny sometimes.
You need the variance trade to hit you along the way.
Yeah. You just gotta, make the right decisions, or as good of decisions as you can, and kind of accept whatever the outcome is. So yeah, with that said, I guess we'll just get right into week 10 then. I'm going to pull up, I'm going to share my screen here. All right, so we are on FanDuel again. They shrunk your tournament a little bit here. So it's down.
It's not as good of a deal this week, actually, too. I think it's only just over 20% of the field this week, I think. But yeah, I don't know. That's weird that they did that. It's been filling up every week, but
yeah, FanDuel. I think it's just like bigger stuff with them. With NBA starting, they're probably just. Maybe. I think it's probably just a matter of like limiting liability. They're not wanting to. They're not wanting to overlay. They're like proactively, cutting some contest sizes. And generally, I mean, that's the reality of DFS is the bankrolls and the amount of people who have money to play as the season goes on kind of dwindles as people start to get a little beat down if they haven't won. It's just the reality of the beast. But yeah, either way, it's still a really good structure. $3,000 to first out of 437 people, still the 5 max, $65 entry. Still getting over 20% of the people of the entries are getting paid. So yeah, it's and it's slight. It's still at 2x. So if you're making the money, you're doubling your money. So again. Structure-wise, it's still way better than most of the lottery type contests you're going to find out there. So yeah, you want to share I've got your lineup that you shared with me pulled up. If you want to kind of go through it and just talk about what you've got this week and how you're seeing things.
Absolutely. I was kind of going back and forth between 3 candidates for quarterback, but I'm going to be very curious how the field views some of these spots based on recency bias of poor performance the week prior, which is something we can capitalize on if, it winds up shaping up that, these are maybe lower owned situations than they maybe should be. And then on the flip side, you have high confidence that may not be so confident. I'm sure that'll be covered more by you guys on 1 week season as we go throughout the weekend. But so yeah, I decided to go back. I think we had done a Geno team earlier this season, but I love the Seahawks here in a bounce back spot at home. There's a lot of good teams that have run into the buzzsaw of the Baltimore Ravens, i.e. Detroit Lions in Baltimore. And so now this week they're back at home, clear pass funnel, and a team that is up in pace in the Commanders that loves to pass the ball. So I have a Geno Smith with Tyler Lockett and Jackson Smith-Njigba double stack. And then I have a unique run back of Logan Thomas on this build at tight end. One of the reasons I did that is to be able to fit some other game environments in on skinny stacks that I want to target, at least so far, looking at this week. So we start with that. Then we have Travis Etienne. They're coming off a bye week, back at home. They're playing a team in the 49ers that you typically steer towards the pass. I have him skinny stacked with Deebo Samuel. Love the report on Deebo. Practicing in full, all systems go, according to what Shanahan said. Also coming off a bye. Both of these teams are pass rate over expectation, tilt toward the pass. And even small areas of the field where Yak comes into play. ETN, interesting, looking at his targets this year in the passing game, much better, much more well-rounded than last year when people were wondering why he wasn't getting targeted in the pass game. Here it's like 6'5", 5. He's averaging like basically almost 5 targets in the pass game too. And obviously he's the, he's kind of like a CMC kind of role, except he's $2,100 cheaper than CMC. So I like ETN. I like the Debo skinny with him and the Yak opportunities that a fully healthy Debo will present to kind of get the 49ers back on track. Now, as far as Najigba, I actually watched a press conference with Pete Carroll earlier in this week. And in that press conference, he was talking up Najigba. He said, quote unquote, he is a regular part of our offense now, and we are definitely intending to, get him more involved. So that was kind of cool to hear that from Pete Carroll, although sometimes with Carroll, got to watch the coach speak, I guess, from a historical standpoint. But
he's generally pretty good on stuff like that, where he gets like the rep with the coach speak stuff is he's like the eternal optimist. So he thinks like every guy's going to be healthy in like 2 days.
Right.
So like when it comes to like actual usage stuff, he's actually relatively reliable compared to a lot of other coaches. And you look at like last week against the Ravens, Tyler Lockett played 90% of the snaps, DK Metcalf 86, and JSN played 82%. So like they're just the base 11 personnel offense, 3 wide receivers, and all 3 of these guys are out there, almost every single play. So what he's saying, it lines up with what we're seeing.
Yep. And obviously a caveat here with this practice build, a lot of question mark health concerns to monitor. As always, we record this early when, the smoke hasn't cleared on who's playing and who's not. But like Tyler Lockett's had a hamstring questionable, I think, every week of the year this year, and then he's just fine. And if you look at his targets over the last 3 games, I think he's averaging like 7 to 8 targets a game over the last.
He's got 8 or more targets in 3 of their last 4 games. So yeah.
So and Geno, he's going to bounce back, I think, at home. One thing to watch that could be an interesting twist to explore. Kenneth Walker has not practiced at all this week yet. He has a chest injury. If that winds up going later into the weekend, maybe Charbonnet is a cheap option you can consider in the flex. On a tournament, which this is a tournament type team, as he is a pass catching running back at 4,900, that would really free up some salary for other spots on your team. Just another thing to monitor. So yeah, that's something else to kind of maybe switch out for. And then I have Aaron Jones on this build. He comes back and Green Bay looks a lot better. So you can definitely run on the Steelers, and I think they're going to have to develop Jones in this game for them to have a chance with a fierce pass rush that the Steelers would present to Jordan Love otherwise if they were trying to establish the pass, so to speak. And then I'm going to go to the well one more time on our flex at the moment. It's Tony Pollard, and I kind of pair him with the Cowboys defense. My thinking there is Cowboys defense creates turnovers, shorts fields, and I would imagine they want to try to get some confidence and kind of get Pollard going a little bit. I don't really see Dak having to do his full allotment of passing against an inferior opponent, although we have seen him kind of do a crush job on inferior opponents earlier in the year. But I'm figuring if Pollard doesn't do it this week, no need to really think about it much going forward. And I say that a little sarcastically. But I have him here in the flex. However, the one spin you can do on this particular build, I always kind of have a little pricing twist I want to present every week initially. You could put Pollard in running back 2 spot, take out Aaron Jones. And then in the flex spot, you can go on the other side of that game to, I call a stock watch pointing up candidate in Deontay Johnson. That dude's been balling ever since he came back from injury. If you wanted to get a wide receiver in the flex instead of a running back, maybe for upside, you could still retain Pollard, and then you can have the other piece of the game of that. Instead of Aaron Jones, you could put in Deontay, or you can even work it to where maybe you have a skinny stack of those two, and then kind of transition your team in other spots. So that's a quick run of this particular build, and I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, I think with Pollard, what it comes down to is like, so sometimes situationally stuff just works out a certain way. So like Pollard, you look at 2 weeks ago, like they played the Rams and they smashed the Rams and he ended up with 6 FanDuel points. It wasn't really that he even did anything bad. It's just their defense scored. They happened to score their first couple touchdowns through the air, and like there just wasn't really anything that got him going. So I think like if he were to not do well this week, that would be the most likely way. The Giants, it's hard to understate how bad they looked. How bad this could get. I mean, it's right now their team implied team total is 11 points. The Cowboys are 17-point favorites, and honestly, that feels a little light. I feel like if the Giants are able to put up 14 points, I'd be pretty surprised in this spot. And you look at the Cowboys, their season. I mean, they beat the Giants 40-0 on opening night. They beat the Jets 30-10 at home. They beat the Patriots 38-3 at home. They beat the Rams 43-20 at home. So that's 4 games that they've won by 20 or more points, and it's always against they're beating up on the weak kid, right? Like they're doing it against like the poor teams, but it doesn't get much worse than Tommy DeVito being trotted out there. And like it feels like a spot where I'll be interested to see what happens with the Giants, because Brian Daboll is a very well-respected coach. I know he's known as like a player's coach. And he's good, I think, at what he does, but like they kind of had expectations coming into this season, and like the whole thing's falling apart right now. Like the mood can't be good in that locker room. Like, so it's just like, are they going to quit? Like, are they just going to totally fold? And the Cowboys are like the ultimate front runners, where when things start going good, then that's when they really start rolling, and Jerry World is rocking. So it'll be interesting how that whole thing plays out. It's interesting, like the Cowboys defense. They're 5,200, which usually 5,000 is the highest price defense, but they went over that. And I still think that Dallas will end up close to like 30% ownership. And honestly, it feels risky any lineup that you don't have the Cowboys defense in this week. So, but that's a long-winded way of saying, like, I get what you're saying with Pollard. If it doesn't happen this week, when's it going to happen? But I don't think he's going to like completely dud, but I think I think a ceiling game is really kind of unlikely, just because like, I don't know that they're really going to need him.
Coincidentally, Pollard's best game was against the Giants in week 1 this year. So, there is that. Obviously he was utilized.
Yeah. I'm just saying, I don't. Again, I think he's going to have a good game. I don't think he's going to have like a 30-pointer. Like on paper, it looks like, oh, well, they should score 35 points. He's the lead running back. This should be where he smashes. I think he's a safe play. He's a fine play. He's probably not the one that wins it for you, but he keeps you, you don't need every position to win it for you.
I'm with you. I just feel it's very realistic he could get 2 touchdowns this week, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Unlike last week, which I thought that was a more difficult spot. And to your point, it's not like he's. As a matter of fact, he actually looked the best I thought he had looked all year last week, as far as just pep in the step and just the way he was, executing. I think he actually wasn't there a touchdown that was called back. I think he did. I think he did get in the end zone last week.
I think at some point, yeah, the Cowboys found like 10 different ways to not score touchdowns in the second half of that game. Yeah, I mean, and it makes sense. This is where it makes sense so sometimes like we saw with the Colts last week with Jonathan Taylor and the Colts defense. So the Colts defense having those 2 touchdowns, that kind of makes them like a ceiling play. They had a great week, obviously, but those touchdowns kind of short-circuited Taylor, where he had a solid game, but he wasn't going to reach his ceiling. So people really like to do that running back defense correlation. So that's where just knowing what tournament you're playing in is so important, because it's like, I don't think, like, when I do my runs in the Millie Maker, I probably won't play Pollard and the Cowboys defense together very often, because if the Cowboys defense is smashing and having, 2 touchdowns and going nuts, then I think that makes it more likely Pollard has like a 15 to 18 point week, which, is fine, but isn't like winning tournaments. Whereas if Pollard's having like the really big week, then to me, that's like the Giants have kept it somewhat competitive. The Cowboys have had to march down the field a little bit. So then I would, but in a smaller contest like yours, like you have a nice little floor and ceiling combination, and you don't need to beat, 150,000 people. You need to beat 400. So, yeah, like, again, just knowing the structure of the tournament you're playing is always so critical, because I think playing those 2 together, it's 13K. So like if you're looking for, kind of 3X is like the barometer, like, do I think there's a good chance that a specific play or block can get to 3X their salary? So if you're spending 13K, can we get 39 points from Pollard and the Cowboys? Like, I think there's a pretty good shot at that, one way or the other. And we don't really care how we get the points. We just want to end up at the top when it's all said and done.
Right. 2 points I want to emphasize, actually, that are adverse to historical DFS theory that have really been working this year. One is paying up for defense instead of paying down. I know a lot of people are always taught, the defense doesn't matter, pay down for that to free up salary in other areas. But it's been really profitable to pay up for defenses this year so far. And a lot of my most profitable teams I've actually gone up the scale instead of down the scale on defenses. I played on DraftKings for my first time this year last week. I had a single entry team that placed 78th out of 4,900. And that was a Jonathan Taylor Colts defense, actually, on that particular team. The other thing is, one more week and looking back at the first place team in this particular tournament, it was another double stack run back. So now we're up to 9 out of 10 weeks in this tournament. The first place team has been a double stack shell run back. And last week, obviously, it was CJ Stroud, but you had to have Schultz and Dell with the Rachaad White run back, which is a little more unique. But it's still hitting, and it proved true in this tournament last week again. So yeah, paying up defense, don't be afraid to do it. If it's like, especially if it's a smash spot where you may need that in the final tally. And then that, at least in small field, that classic, on the face of it, double stack run back is definitely still viable.
Yeah, well, and that's where so much of, and I mean, part of what we're doing here, right, is we are like, part of the edge on FanDuel as we see it is just that so many people get their habits and their strategies and approaches from DraftKings. Like, that's kind of where a lot of people focus. And then they don't, when they play on FanDuel, they use a lot of the same theories. So like to your point, like the paying down for defense, the saving money there, like that's just so popular and so natural that people do that on DraftKings because the pricing is just a lot tighter. It's a lot harder to pay up. So like it's a lot more affordable to make that happen, to pay up for these guys or for these defenses on FanDuel, but like people don't adjust at the rate that they probably should for the fact that it's more affordable, if that makes sense. Like for example, this exact team that you have for FanDuel, it would cost it's like $1,500 over the salary cap if you tried to play the same team on DraftKings. So like, what's the first thing that anyone would try to do? They would say, okay, well, I'm not paying $4,400 for Dallas on DraftKings. I'm going to find a cheap defense. So yeah, I think I totally agree that like kind of locking in those elite spots, and paying up for defense is definitely worth it. And it helps create a little more unique build. It kind of forces you to do different things with your salary. Because I think it can be real easy when you pay down on FanDuel, when you pay down at defense, it becomes really easy to just make a team that looks good, like has a lot of big names. And you don't really have to get outside the box. And so I think, there's a lot of structural advantages to paying up as well that should be taken into consideration.
That's an interesting contrast. 1,500 over on DraftKings, and on FanDuel we have $200 left over with this lineup for maybe late swap purposes or what have you. And to your point, that defense, it's adequately covered in your FanDuel course as well. I remember that from the course, how you can pay up for defense and have much more freedom to do that on FanDuel as opposed to DraftKings. So that is true.
Yeah. So, what are your thoughts on Etienne then? You like his pass game role?
He's just such a focal point of the offense. I mean, he's one of the few backs where it's not really that much of a split with anybody else. He's in a game where both teams are good teams. They're both coming off of a bye. So they're both going to be prepared, and they are at home. And yeah, it's tough to run on the 49ers, but Etienne is such a unique talent, I think, overall. And I think they're going to have, for them to be successful, they're going to have to involve him in the pass game, especially like the short pass game against the 49ers. And like I said, I love the skinny of a Debo. Ayuk is viable. Obviously, if you can get up to CMC. I love CMC. It's so hard to get up to him and have a balanced team, it seems, on FanDuel especially.
Yeah, well, and the thing with McCaffrey is like he's good, but like he's got, for his price, he had the monster game against the Cardinals where he scored 45 points. He's got 5 other games, 5 of his other 7 games, he scored at least 20 FanDuel points, but he hasn't scored more than, I think it's 26.8. Yeah, the Bengals game, that's his next highest scoring. So he's only scored 30 points once this season. And to your point, you look at Etienne, he's scored 20 or more points, each of the last 4 games. He's got 2 touchdowns in 3 of those games. He had the long touchdown reception against the Steelers in their last game before their bye. But, to your point, CMC had that one massive outlier game, but otherwise, his performance has been pretty on par with what we've seen from Etienne. So yeah, it's interesting for sure. Early ownership projections sometimes taken with a grain of salt, but both of these guys in this game are actually projecting early on, at least, to be relatively low owned, looking like single digits on both of them. So,
interesting.
Yeah, I think it's, the perception of the 49ers defense. And then, McCaffrey, kind of the point I just made, what he's priced at relative to, he's not really been producing a bunch of 30-point games. And, the Jaguars defense is pretty legit. They've played well this year. I think they're top 5 in the league against the run. They're actually top 5 against the run and the pass, but they've given up. They've been more vulnerable to the pass, especially against teams who can make some plays after the catch, which obviously the 49ers would fit that bill. So yeah, and I like the idea of Debo kind of being one of those spots where he's coming back from injury. People are probably going to be a little tentative to play him. I think on DraftKings, again, seeing like the flow over from DraftKings where it's so much more volume dependent there. But like, it wouldn't be shocking to see Debo rack up 110 total yards, and a couple touchdowns on just 6 or 7 touches, which is kind of what you're hoping for right now when they've got all their guys healthy.
Yeah, usually it would be a concern if they maybe played the week before, but because they had that bye week, I think that may have given him the time he needed to kind of be back to full tilt, which the coach is uttering.
Yeah, it even kind of sounded like if they didn't have a week 9 bye, let's say their bye was like week 12, it sounds like in week 8 he might have like tried to play. But they basically just were like, well, we're not going to have you play this week. We're off next week anyways. We'll just give you the week off and not rush you back, which might have backfired because they got pounded by Cincinnati that week. So might not have been the best.
Yeah, they're coming off 3 straight losses too. Interestingly enough, they didn't have Debo for any of those. Yeah, so he just seems to be the correlation there is they know that they need to get him going, I feel, for them to give themselves their best shot to kind of get back on track. The other thing with ETN, it just seems like it's a thin running back week to me on matchups, just overall. I don't really know why on the face of it when I was kind of looking around. I don't know. He seems to make sense to me based on the way the running back pool is this week, especially with pricing on FanDuel.
Yeah, so
getting $2,100 discount on similar production.
It makes sense for sure that you would try to get some certainty in workload because there are a lot of guys who, I mean, Kamara even he saw his lightest workload of the year last week. Eckler and McCaffrey obviously are more expensive. Then you look at, Gibbs and Montgomery, they're both healthy now. So there's questions around their workload. Henry has been disappointing and Tampa's a bit of a pass funnel. Obviously we talked about Pollard. There's just a lot of guys who there isn't like a lot of certainty. It does, like you said, like there's going to be a few guys that end up having good games. And again, like we talked about before, you don't have to win the lottery to win this tournament. You're kind of trying to make sure you don't have any duds across the lineup and then hoping that 2 or 3 guys kind of go off. And that's kind of how you win this size of tournament. So it's really interesting in that way. It's funny you talk about the Niners, the 3 straight losses. Quietly, the Niners and Seahawks are tied for the division lead. And, this is obviously San Fran's going into Jacksonville, who's a very good team. And Seattle's at home. So just within this lineup, you can kind of see it right in front of our faces here. But like, for all the love San Francisco got the first few weeks of the season, they are now, they could be fighting for a wild card spot by the end of this week.
That's amazing. On the running back field, I will give a slight asterisk. I never play him typically, but maybe Joe Mixon this week. Maybe this could be a Joe Mixon week at home. You can run on Houston. I kind of have some interest in Mixon initially, which I usually don't. But he always has that big game every year. Not that you could ever predict when that is, but I could definitely see a scenario where it could be that kind of week for him, maybe.
Yeah, he'll be one. The status of like Jamar Chase, who missed practice Wednesday, that'll be kind of what drives me. I think, Mixon's couple big games last year, even like Samaje Perine had a big game when Mixon was out. One of the Bengals' top receivers was out whenever their running backs would have a big game. So that's kind of what I'll be watching. I'll be more on Mixon if Chase were to miss. I'll probably have some exposure on one of the sites either way, but it'll be interesting for sure. And then the Seahawks spot, really interesting. You kind of briefly touched on it, but the Seahawks are, and I did the NFL Edge write-up for this game, and I did it last night. It's an interesting spot where you talked about Jackson Smith and Njigba, and so the Seahawks, JSN, he broke his wrist in preseason. So then the first 4 weeks of the season, he was still getting up to speed, and they were kind of figuring things out. DK Metcalf actually hurt his ribs in week 2. Then they had a week 5 bye. They came out of the bye. They're going to play the Bengals. And it was kind of like, okay, now our passing game is fully intact. But then Metcalf hurt his hip in the middle of that game in week 6. And then he missed week 7 against the Cardinals. Well, he came back weeks 8 and 9. They've kind of been all systems go, all their guys. But they played the Browns and the Ravens, who are currently number 1 and 2 in the league in pass defense DVOA. So this week is the first game where they're at full strength. Everybody's healthy, assuming JSN is able to figure it out and he's able to play. This would be the first game they're fully healthy, and they play a Washington defense that's been shredded via the pass multiple times this year, and who now, at the trade deadline, they traded Montez Sweat and Chase Young, 2 elite pass rushers. They didn't really get exposed for that by the Patriots last week, but that's because the Patriots have no talent on their offense. So really an interesting spot for the Seahawks this week, and definitely one I would want to be on top of. And to your point with Washington, they're 3rd in the league in pass rate over expectation. They play at an elevated pace. And the Seahawks defense, again, kind of contextually, being able to see things through the course of the season, the Seahawks defense is, you look at them on paper and, okay, they're the 18th ranked run defense in the league. But prior to week 8, they were like the number 2 or 3 ranked run defense. And then the last 2 weeks, the Browns had some success against them, which Kevin Stefanski's offense is built around the run. They have a good offensive line, a good scheme. And then last week, the Ravens just went like absolutely nuts. But the Ravens look like they might be the best team in the league right now. So to that point, you have a Washington team that can't really run the ball and wants to throw it a lot. And you have a Seattle team that their run defense has been elite against any non-elite rushing team, I guess I'll say it. So yeah, I think this game is it looks like both sides are just going to be chucking the ball all over the yard. So really an interesting spot and one that I'll have a ton of exposure to.
And on FanDuel, Geno's cheaper than Howell in price.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. Geno's price has been good all year. But it's probably one of his better matchups this week. So yeah.
Yeah, well, it'll be fun. It will be exciting. I think that, Geno's going to be the one who leads Maximus to his elusive first championship, but it's coming.
Well, I'll have 5 shots at it. I'm also looking at Kyler, Will Levis, some other interesting options to explore. So, yeah, I'll be looking forward to going on the site, guys, 1 week season to read the Oracle and, Mike's FanDuel Focus is always a great place to get some more information to go with your process. And so yeah, I look forward to it.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for being with us this week. Best of luck in your contest. Remember to like and subscribe. Go ahead and leave comments if you have questions. Love hearing from the people. Otherwise, you can find us on Twitter and on Discord. And with that said, we will let you get to building, and we will see you at the top of the leaderboards, and we will see you next week. Peace out, Maximus.
You too.
1 week season.